Okay, well, thanks everybody for being here today and for joining online. I'm Tom Karako. I'm a senior fellow on the International Security Program and the director of the Missile Defense Project here at CSIS. And we're delighted to welcome Rear Admiral Fred Pyle, who is the director of Surface Warfare Division, N96, Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. So thanks for being here, Admiral Pyle. This event is hybrid, which means folks can submit questions through the registration page, and we invite you to do so. They'll then come to my tablet through the magic of CEC and resilient Navy networks, despite what our adversaries are trying to do. So Admiral Pyle started in his current role in June of 2022. And before that, he served as Director of Maritime Operations Fleet Forces Command in Norfolk. He served as an officer on CGNs, CGs, and DDGs, and his at-sea tours include European, Central Command, and Pacific Command areas of operation. So welcome to CSIS, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
We're gonna hit a lot of things today, including the operational side of acquisition, to how the threat is evolving, to your priorities and visions for surface warfare, and most notably what recent events in the Red Sea can teach us. So I wonder if you could just sort of kick us off by talking about your portfolio broadly. What is in S96? What's your job? And how do you kind of think of your overall RIT?
You bet, Tom. And again, thanks to CSIS, the entire team for this opportunity. Really excited to be here. So my portfolio on the CNO staff is as a surface warfare director, I manage all of our surface combatants. So that's cruisers, that's DDG 1000, that's destroyers, the littoral combat ship, the frigate that is just beginning construction, and then future programs like DDG-X, and all the associated sensors, combat systems, and weapons that go on those platforms. While I am not the resource sponsor for amphibious ships or carriers, my duties apply to the weapons, combat systems, and sensors that go on those platforms as well. So I oversee those. We take the strategic guidance, national security strategy, national defense strategy, national military strategy, and then Navy strategy like CNO's guidance for America's Warfighting Navy that came out earlier this year with a focus on warfighting, warfighters, and the foundation that supports them, as well as input from our fleets to give us the guidance we need to set requirements, and that's my primary job, is to set the requirements for these platforms and then ultimately resource those requirements. So in a nutshell, that's what I do as N96 in surface warfare.
So let's big picture in terms of the strategic environment, the threat environment, from where you sit for requirement setting for that. How do you think about those problems, how they changed within the course of your career, and what's the outlook on that look for you?
Sure. So I've been, I first joined the Navy in 1980 as an enlisted sailor, and I've been doing this for about 40 years now. So I joined during the Cold War, then saw the peace dividend post Cold War, and then as we got into the global war on terror, now we're back to great power competition. So I've seen our maritime strategy, our naval forces evolve through those 4 decades. Currently, we're very much focused on the pacing threat that is China, and making sure we design, we train, we build to be able to counter that threat. We're paying very close attention to what's going on in the European theater with Ukraine and Russia, as well as Gaza, and of course the Red Sea, and what the Houthis are doing as a proxy for Iran. I would say we look at it through I'd say a 2+3 lens, right? It's China and Russia, and then it's Iran, North Korea, and violent extremism is how we look at those threats. We set up our operations activities, investments, and exercises to make sure we're training to those threats, and we're prepared to address those should the need be.
Well, let me pull the thread a little bit on the China as the pacing threat, as the NDS says. What do you see on that front in terms of the carabouts for China and how they would threaten our surface fleet such that it informs your requirements? What especially about China are you seeing?
Sure. So China's ability to build and the quantity of their force, they're on a glide slope to get to 400 ships by the end of this decade. Quantity, some say, is a quality, but what I would offer is the capability is also very important, and I think that's where we have an advantage. We're currently at 294 in our force. We want to get to 381, and that's a challenge. That is a challenge. That's not just a Navy challenge, it's a national challenge. We will continue to operate forward and with our allies and partners, and I think that's also a decisive advantage that the U.S. has in the number of allies and partners that we have throughout the globe, but especially in that region. For instance, Australia, Japan, Republic of Korea, key allies and partners in the region that where we may have a challenge on quantity, we make that up with assistance from allies and partners in the region.
Now, you mentioned Ukraine. There have been a lot of interesting UUVs and USVs in terms of the employment there to threaten the Black Sea fleet, surface torpedoes, otherwise. How do you think about that piece of the threat in particular?
Yeah, so we're paying very close attention to all the ongoing conflicts, and we're taking lessons learned from those. I would say one of the key initiatives as a Department of Defense we're taking is the DefSecDef Hicks is leading, and then the Navy contribution to that effort is the Disruptive Capabilities Office. Up until December of last year, it was known as the Unmanned Task Force, but we broadened that recently to make it the Disruptive Capabilities Office. And what that allows us to do is look at the capability gaps we have, identify an existing capability that's out there in industry, and then procure it much more rapidly than we can through the planning, programming, budgeting, execution process. So it gives us another avenue to move quicker in delivering capability to both our forces and allies and partners. I think that's a key takeaway, at least for the surface force, from what we're seeing in Ukraine.
Well, I know there's talk about using Project Replicator for instance, the CUAS capability to get that out in mass. Again, from where you set requirements for the defense of the fleet, how do you think about the demand signal for air and missile defense, for instance?
Yeah, Tom, I don't think it's ever been stronger. We are, with our forces are engaged in the Red Sea right now, we've not seen since probably World War II. Those ships are operating inside weapon engagement zones. They have to be prepared on a moment's notice to conduct engagements, and they have to get it right every single time. And I could not be more proud of how those sailors are performing over the last 6 months, and also how those systems are performing, given what they're operating in. These sailors are having to, steam through merchants at night and be able to get set up to conduct an engagement. And having spent 30 years of my career in destroyers, I'm here to tell you that's a difficult task, and then to replicate that month after month after month, again, they're performing very well. Specifically to the integrated air missile defense piece, the threats they're engaging are unmanned, they're anti-ship cruise missiles, they're anti-ship ballistic missiles. And in each one of those threat groups, again, we're performing well. And the systems and the sailors are performing as designed and as trained.
Yeah. I think it was the Marine Commandant in 2019, his planning guidance, that talked about a new era of missile warfare. And in part, that speaks to the demand signal that you're talking about. It also speaks to the demand signal for long-range fires in general. You see our Australian and Japanese friends going after Tomahawk and SM6, for instance. How do you see that demand signal and that boosting demand signal for long-range strike for the U.S. Navy and for some of our friends as well?
Yeah, I think it's a good demand signal, and I think anytime we can have like systems and do co-development and cooperational work with allies and partners, I think that's the right answer. Bringing as many friends as you can with guns is goodness in a conflict. So I think those relationships are very strong. I think the ability to, where we can, share that technology, that just makes sense. Again, from a capacity standpoint, it just gives us an advantage.
So staying at a pretty high level here, it's always good to ask the fundamental questions over and over again. How do you think, as head of surface warfare, what is the fundamental purposes of the U.S. Navy? What is the fundamental purpose of sea control that inform everything that you do, that's upstream of everything else?
Sure.
Big picture.
So, big picture, I mean, global commerce relies on open communication to the seas, right? The ability, I mean, I'm expecting an Amazon package tonight when I get home. In part, maritime security contributes to that package getting to my doorstep or your doorstep on time. That's one aspect of why the maritime is significant. Numbers, 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water, 80% of the world's population lives near the water, 90% of global commerce flows on the water. So when you consider how our economy, how the global economy rests on maritime security, I think that provides the relevance of why we need a maritime fleet. Surface Navy operates forward. We conduct sea control. We conduct sea denial. You're seeing that in the Red Sea right now. You're seeing that when we conduct transits through the Strait of Taiwan. We can operate anywhere, any place, anytime, in accordance with international law that we choose.
And fundamentally, you highlighted commerce and global commerce, and that's the principles of the free sea that, at least for a couple hundred years, have been pretty important to what is sometimes called the liberal or national order, or some version of that. But that's not to be taken for granted, and there are views of the free sea that perhaps the Chinese and other folks might differ with us on.
Sure, and where sovereignty if the Indo-Pacific region has been challenged, we want to be there to make sure that we maintain the international rules-based order and support our allies, treaty partners, with maintaining that access. And
one of the direct places in which a lot of that's been going on for shipping and otherwise has been in the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. So why don't we go there and talk about this, in your words, the players on the field, mm-hmm. What they've been doing, and what it tells us about surface warfare more broadly.
Yeah, so I'll start, Tom, with in October when the conflict kicked off in Gaza, and we started looking at Operation Prosperity Guardian, which stood up a few months after the conflict in Gaza began. We saw the need to maintain flow of shipping through the Gulf of Aden, through the Bab el-Mandeb, into the Red Sea. We're at, last count, I think 24 nations supporting Operation Prosperity and Guardian. So always good to have an international face on an effort where you're trying to maintain the flow of global commerce. The Navy, by operating forward, we were there on station, first with the Ford Strike Group, now with the Eisenhower Strike Group, and we've maintained a constant presence there to defend international shipping that is transiting through that strait.
There's also, of course, defense of a partners, plural, mm-hmm. In terms of what are the various proxies and other folks have been doing there. How have the ships been performing?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we could not be more pleased with how they're performing. It's evidence of years of investment in design, the Aegis weapon system, of the missiles they're shooting, the Standard Missile family. It's investments in training, both virtual, live, and constructive, of how we train. And also, again, the strength, I can't understate the strength of allies and partners that we have 24 plus nations supporting us. So it's going well. Again, systems are performing as advertised, and we're providing a vital support to the nation of Israel and other partners in that region to try to control any horizontal escalation across that theater.
Well, I think just about every defensive system that's on the Aegis destroyers has been employed. There's been some historic firsts, mm-hmm. With SM6 a number of times, SM3 as well, in the most recent salvo. What can you say about the threats? I know the CNO has talked about this. What can you say about kind of the number and types that Aegis air defenders are having to contend with?
Sure. So the primary threats we're seeing are unmanned, and then anti-ship cruise missiles and anti-ship ballistic missiles. Those are the big three, and of what their units are seeing. And I also want to emphasize surface combatants and the air wing off the carrier are helping to minimize this threat in current operations. So that's goodness. Yes, the Standard missile family is performing against these threats. We are always, one of the things I get challenged on is you're on the wrong side of the cost curve, right? You're shooting $1 million missiles at $100,000 drones, and that's true. And what I would offer again is the system is performing exactly as advertised. Admiral Wayne Meyer would say, we built it with defense in depth, and it's performing with defense in depth. Do we need to find, or should we find a more cost-effective way of downing, say, an inexpensive drone? Absolutely. And we're working towards that, and we have some solutions that I can't go into, but we are going to get after finding more cost-effective ways to address those lower-end threats.
Well, it only took 15 minutes for Wayne Meyer to be named. It was just a question of minutes in terms of how long. Other Wayne Meyerisms, of course, quite welcome. But just the quantity of these threats, as well as the diversity. And I'll go back to Admiral Meyer for a second, which is the philosophy of Aegis and the philosophy of layered defense, for instance. And we also saw, according to USNI and other folks, the historic CSIS engagements. And if that's being employed, it's because the threat's pretty close. Yeah. Talk about your perspective on layered defense and maybe some lessons that are being divined or at least being observed so far there.
Yeah, I can speak to that in general. So when we talk about layered defense, if a threat's coming at a ship, you have a sequence of engagements. And obviously you want to gauge it at the longest possible range to give yourself decision space before that threat flies into the side of your ship. And when you look at missiles like the SM6, like the SM2, those are your longer to mid-range. And then you get closer into the ship, you have the Evolved Sea Sparrow missile and the Rolling Airframe missile, ESSM and RAM. Those are closer in defense, and as Tom mentioned, the close-in weapon system is a 20 millimeter gun that is used for very close. And the theory is that as that threat comes in, should one of those layers fail, you've got another layer there. And since the mid-October, when the Carney conducted her first engagement, these ships have been demonstrating that defense in depth time and time again. So that is goodness. I would also offer, and I want to I've done several tours on aircraft carriers with my Air Wing teammates, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the work that the Air Wing is doing and the engagements they're conducting with our aircraft.
So staying with kind of the layered defense there, yes, there's the different interceptors and all that sort of stuff, but detect, control, engage. The first part is detect. The heart of the Aegis system is the spy. And I think it was the Mason back in 2016 when it was engaging things in the same vicinity. If you don't see it fast enough, you're going to well be in a world of hurt. So I guess the question would be is, how would you characterize the spy, the radar performance on especially the older DDGs that are operating there with or without the LNA upgrades?
Sure. So I would characterize it as effective and operating as designed. So as a Navy, we've been very focused on readiness. I mean, there's a reason CNO Franchetti has said we're fighting, which sets a priority on current readiness and our ability to fight tonight. So we've made the right investments in SPY. It's performing well. One thing I'll point out that was a learning factor for us is as these engagements took place, we found the ability to take those engagements, take the data, bring it back here to CONUS, and do a quick assessment with our warfare tactics instructors. These are specialists in their field in integrated air and missile defense, and you may think, well, that's kind of like the 5,000-mile reach back and somebody reading your homework, but it's those ships that are operating have received it well, and it's a quick assessment of, hey, your engagement was spot on, keep pressing, or hey, maybe here's an area you want to improve in. So it's that rapid turnaround learning that we've been able to apply, and then we're also applying that to the next deploying groups that are heading out. So there's a tremendous amount of learning going on there, and the ability to just provide forceful backup to those operating to say, Yep, that was exactly right. Or here's how you might want to tweak your next engagement.
And moving from the spy to the combat system, the baselines. You've got some older Flight 1 DDGs that have had some baseline improvements. And how are you seeing that holding up more broadly? Yeah,
holding up well. So getting into the geek world a little bit, Aegis has multiple baselines. When I was a lieutenant, I think there were...
Geek it up. That's what we're here for.
There were 12 baselines. Today we're at about 5, and ultimately we want to get to one baseline. Because you can imagine if you have 5 different baselines, if you had 5 different baselines of your phone and you were trying to interoperate with other users, you can see issues. They may not be completely compatible, slightly different software issues, slightly different training issues. When you're doing the maintenance, that's a challenge. So we want to get to this one baseline, and that's ultimately called integrated combat systems, is where we want to go. Before I get into that, we have a very good modernization program for our Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. There's 74 ships in the fleet. We've been modernizing them since about 2011. We're currently going through a DDG mod that's going to upgrade 25 of the Flight 2 Alpha ships. So that's the middle tranche of the ships. And it's keeping those ships very relevant. And when I say modernization, we're modernizing the combat systems.
That's great. And you're talking a little bit between the seamless or closer interoperability of different baselines. But this most recent last month's engagement of these, 330 objects from Iran also involved a lot of our allies and partners, or at least several allies and partners, which includes different operating systems entirely. So how would you speak to anything that you've observed in terms of partnering with the Jordanians or the Brits or anybody else, for instance?
Yeah, so what I can speak to there is we work, for that engagement, we really work with our partners at Missile Defense Agency, who is the organization that procures the standard Missile 3. And we work with them on interoperability issues. We have a close relationship. So while I own the combat systems and the modernization of that capability, I make sure I stay aligned with my Missile Defense Agency counterparts anytime it comes to the ballistic missile defense process. So we have a very good relationship. It's been a long-standing relationship. Think back to the phased adaptive approach of circa 2008, when we started Defense of Israel and Defense of Europe. And the fruits of our labor have paid off in what you saw from the good ship, the two Arleigh Burke-class destroyers that participated in the Defense of Israel during that engagement.
Well, I know the Navy doesn't like tethers and all that sort of stuff for that mission, but boy, it's certainly proving to be useful. And the Secretary of the Navy was testifying to that very point, that boy, we're going to need some more of those SM3s, and we'll come back to that in just a bit. But it's not just the hardware, of course. There's been a lot of innovation, and so I wonder if you could talk about what you're seeing from the sailors, from the warfighters in the Red Sea, and kind of lessons learned, whether it's adaptability or innovation. What are they doing and figuring out on the fly?
Sure. So it goes back to investments we made in training. So you mentioned 2016 and the Mason and its engagements, and there were some issues that we learned through those engagements. So these were similar engagements in the Red Sea, if you're not familiar with that background. But we took those lessons learned, as well as the lessons we learned from some accidents we had on ships during that same time frame. And we made a lot of investments in training, in maritime skills training, just our ability to drive the ship in that kind of environment. And we have now some world-class simulators for driving ships, similar to our aviation counterparts. We made investments in live and virtual constructive training. What does that mean? That when we're operating off the coast of Norfolk or off the coast of San Diego and during our training, we can set up an environment that is very stressful for that watchstander, that will replicate what they'll likely see in theater, and that's paying off. We also do virtual operator and virtual operator training, virtual maintenance training. So these are simulators to train the operator, the enlisted operator that's, say, running a spy radar or operating the Aegis combat systems. And we can do that in the classroom under a skilled trainer. So those investments have really paid off, and that's roughly about $6 billion over the last 10 years which is a lot, but I think we're seeing the return on that investment now on how the ships are performing in the Red Sea.
Well, on this topic, training and such, I think you have a video. If you want, this would be a good time.
Yes.
Okay, so why don't we spool that up?
Success is not an accident. And lead to the edge of your authority. Committed, resolute, successful.
Success is a team sport, and behind every success is a sailor. And in the case of the ships deployed today, it's a team effort, and the teams are doing fantastic. But not lost on me, despite the big headlines that you see of what ships are doing, it really is about individual sailors functioning and succeeding as part of the team.
It's a fact, not an assumption. We've prepared and are poised to carry out kinetic operations. Our sailors, every sailor within our commands, recognize their personal contributions to the ship's lethality. All are prepared to move, shoot, communicate with confidence.
Are you ready to fight tonight? Our team absolutely is, and they have proven that every single day since this crisis began. And the level of readiness that has been demonstrated by our Navy team has been truly, truly remarkable.
Being ready has to be the full team. Let's take examples of guided missile destroyers at 30 knots weaving in between merchant shipping, firing in defense of themselves and of partner nations and of others in the region. That takes a full court press, and it takes the entire team being ready.
The teams we're a part of actively seek technical and tactical mastery. We want intensity and toughness in our training, anticipating that seminal moment when we need to clear the weather decks.
As somebody who's been a SWO for 10 years, I can honestly say that this is the kind of deployment that I only dreamt of and that I didn't think that I would ever get the chance to do, where I'm actually taking shots at the enemy. And it proves to me how important our training cycle is, because I was prepared to take those shots and I didn't second guess what I was doing because I knew.
I was junior officer deck on October 19th for the first few engagements, and then I've been on the bridge for multiple other ones as well. And during those times, I think about having all of the experience that we had from SWAT and ComTrex as a team and running through our PPRs and being able to practice really helped prepare us for when it came time to actually execute the mission.
We're obsessed with the basics, we're obsessed with attention to detail, and we're obsessed with being the best. I am not remotely interested in just being good. I want to be the best.
In this moment, surface warfare is front and center. Flank 3, birds away.
We were at the tip of the spear when we were called into the fight.
You ready to get in the fight?
Staying with kind of some of the lessons learned, we've got a question that's come in from Eric from the U.S. Navy. I don't know anything other than Eric, but Sailor Eric is asking about lessons with respect to combat logistics, and particularly, he says, with respect to ordnance management and combat reloading.
Yeah. So Eric, thanks for the question. There are two parts. One on contested logistics. This is an area where we're very much focused on in all of our exercise and our activities. We have, the CNO has her NAV plan implementation framework. One of the elements of the NAV plan implementation framework is contested logistics. So that's how we take into account what the 2B state or what the current state is and the 2B state of where we need to get to. On the munitions side, one thing the conflict you just saw in the video has taught us is, one, we need to increase our munition stocks, and two, we need to have the ability to reload and resupply anywhere in the globe. So those have been two key lessons that have been driven home by both Ukraine and the Red Sea. And we have work to do in the expeditionary reload capability, but we do have some capability, and we're working towards being more expeditionary in where we are on our platforms.
On that exact topic you just spent, John Ridge ask the question, has the experience in the Red Sea prompted the U.S. Navy to increase its total munitions requirements formally, or is that more in the sense of, hey, we ought to do that?
Yeah, so what I would say, John, is, again, it's put a very fine point, a bold, an underline on the need to increase our weapons inventory. We have, it had not been a focus area, I would say, before this. Like anything, there's a lot of tough choices you need to make on do you procure more munitions, do you procure more spares, those kinds of trade-offs. We're very focused on getting our munitions inventories increased. So we've given that demand signal to industry over the last several budgets, and now we're talking max sustaining rate, not minimum sustaining rate. And anytime we can get to a multi-year program on munitions, I think that's good for both the Navy and it's good for industry. It sends a clear demand signal to our industry partners of what we expect over the course of that multi-year, and it allows us some predictability on what we're going to have each year on stocks. We are closely managing all the weapons inventories now, but we're in a sustainable position right now, given what we're seeing in the Red Sea.
Great. Well, let me talk a little bit. I know this is of interest. We were talking about it just before. The much ballyhooed cost exchange ratio question. Mm-hmm. You've alluded to this. You mentioned earlier about the desire to get to cheaper cost per kill. Whether it's using an SM3 to take out a drone or what have you. At the same time, that's tough, and there's only so many VLS cells, and you got to get in close to use the CSIS, as you were saying, and that's not necessarily something you want to do. So how do you think about the cost exchange ratio? How do you think about cost versus value in terms of the value of what is being defended, and other calculations? And how do you calculate the cost exchange? What's the N and what's the numerator and the denominator? Is it just the round, or is it frankly the platform and the overall mission that gets you there, and the O&M as well?
Sure. So first, you've seen the supplemental submitted, and you heard Secretary Del Toro testify. We've expended about $1 billion in munitions since last October. So we're always looking for assistance to replenish those in the form of a supplemental. But we've also got plans in place to recertify rounds. So these are rounds that are potentially a little bit older, to get those recertified and bring them back in stock. On the cost exchange, I mean, first and foremost, it's, are we executing the mission? Are we executing the mission to defend whatever we're tasked to do? And the answer I can say without a doubt is yes, we are executing that mission. We're executing it well. I talked a little bit about existing capabilities that are more cost effective. And we are looking at those. We're doing that through the replicator initiative and the disruptive capabilities process to see if those are capabilities we could field. And we're always looking for opportunities to field those lower cost capabilities.
But again, back to the Wayne-Meyer principle of layered defense and all that, allowing the threat to come in closer so that you can kill it with something cheaper may require a different risk tolerance. It may require a different kind of doctrine. And that, if you're commander of the ship, you're like, I couldn't possibly shoot at that incoming threat because the NHTSA criteria and the cost exchange ratio. Well, that's crazy, of course.
Yeah.
So it's a little harder to get there, not just for the technology and the unit cost, but it's some doctrinal and it's greater risk.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we'll make sure that the first entry is safety of the crew and those that are operating. The fleet will get a vote on this, on how they're going to operate with it. And ultimately, we won't field something if it's going to increase risk that is unacceptable. But if there is a capability that can give us that offset to provide a more economical way of killing things, then that's something we're going to pursue. But the fleet will get a vote on exactly how we go about that.
Right. So the other piece of this isn't just the kit; it's also the op tempo and the sustainability, and it's not just refilling the VLSs, but the crew. So what kind of lessons are you and your colleagues seeing about the sustainability and the O&M and all that sort of stuff? They're keyed up
Sure.
24 hours a day. How sustainable is that?
Yeah, so we're very much focused on that because for the first time in a long time, we have folks coming home from combat action, extended combat action. So we want to make sure, first and foremost, we take care of the sailor because they're going to go from a 24/7, 365 on watch at a very high tempo to now I'm going to integrate back into whatever my family life is back home. So we're making sure we pay the right level of attention there to give them that chance to reintegrate into what is shore duty back ashore. We're also looking closely at fatigue and how we manage fatigue. So we have some early development innovation in wearing the Aura Ring to measure a person's stress and taking that into account of how much sleep they're getting and how well they're doing just physically on when they take the watch. So those are new innovative things that did not exist when I was a captain of a ship or a strike group commander or operating at sea. And I think that is goodness that we're bringing into the community because it gives us metrics on, hey, is this sailor ready to actually take the watch? Do I have some other objective measure other than, put me in, Captain, I'm ready to go,
And of course, also just ship rotations, but also ship repair and ship modernization in the DDG fleet more broadly. How is it adversely affecting that process?
So right now, Tom, no. There is a strong demand signal for the surface Navy, as you can see throughout the globe. But we still have our modernization plans in place. We still have our ship repair plans in place. And with the ship repair, we take a quarterly look at the loading each of the fleet concentration areas, so San Diego, Mayport, Norfolk, Pacific Northwest, Hawaii, et cetera. And then we do also a 3-year prediction of what that loading looks like. And we do that to give those private yards the longest possible set of headlights that we can so they can manage their workforce and then definitize the contracts for those repairs as soon as possible so they can get the gear in there and we can have an successful availability and have that ship deliver on time.
Very good. And what about really more the kind of the reload question? How do you think about the ATC reloads for VLSs?
Yeah, so for the group, when you talk about ATC reload, these are big rounds. They're very large weapons. And the ATC environment is kind of unforgiving. And the last thing you want to do is damage a round when you're trying to transfer it into a vertical launch system. So that's a challenge. We don't have that capability right now, but we're working towards achieving that capability, which is the expeditionary reload capability. Not in my portfolio, but my teammates that work expeditionary warfare and logistics are doing a tremendous amount of work on that effort. We've done some demonstrations. We just need to get to a point where we can operationalize it, normalize it across the fleet.
Well, let me kind of close out the Red Sea part by quoting one of my mentors, and he's part of the CSIS Missile Defense Brain Trust, Admiral Arch Macy, who has pounded into me that the purpose of air defense is not to defend; it's to defend long enough to defend to end the threat by other means.
Yeah.
Which is to say, the relationship between active defense and everything else we do, whether it's diplomacy and or whether it's attack ops. So, how are you seeing the playing catch that these Aegis ships are doing in terms of buying time, decision space, and all this sort of stuff for whether it's Tomahawks going in to silence the launchers? How well is that relationship working, would you say?
Sure. So in the case of the Red Sea, we've been at it since last October, and that's combined with offensive strikes as well, which you've heard about. Ultimately, the Navy is not going to solve that problem, right? There are broader issues there that need to be solved at a policy level. But do we have the capability to get after those long range strikes? Yes. Do we have the capacity and capability? Yes, we do. Whether you're talking the Red Sea or whether you're talking elsewhere, on the ability to go offensive. Longer term, when we look at like a platform like DDGX, we do value larger missile launchers, the ability to get to hypersonic weapons. So that's a longer term approach that I think Admiral Macy would be pleased with of what we're talking about in offensive capability.
Well, that's a great segue to kind of the acquisition side of the house more broadly. The Red Sea is showing we're doing great in terms of intercepting a lot of stuff, numbers and diversity and lots of different kinds of attacks and structured attacks, and yet this is not the big league. These are the Iran and the proxies and all this other sort of stuff. So as you think about the magnitude of the problem, how and to what extent, we mentioned munitions requirements and from a formal thing, but in terms of long-range inventory objectives, in terms of, goodness gracious, what's it going to take to be able to buy time against China, right? Are we learning, are we taking the lessons to heart sufficiently, given that this is going to be an order of magnitude more with the pacing threat?
Yeah, I believe we are, Tom. And we're doing that both near term and long term. So very focused on current readiness. That applies globally on our ability, wherever our ships are operating, they need to be ready to fight tonight. Longer term, I talked about DDG modernization. That's a $17 billion program over 17 years. We're putting SPY-6, Aegis Baseline 10, and the latest electronic warfare package onto 25 of our Flight 2 Alpha ships. So that's long-term capability that will be able to perform in the high-end fight against any adversary. Frigate program, we've started building the FFG 62 Constellation class frigate up in in Marinette, Wisconsin. And so we're getting back in the frigate business after being out of it for 30 years. That's goodness. A frigate has destroyer-like capability at a lower price tag, which we like, and we also need more smaller surface combatants with that capability. And then finally, DDGX, which will be a program that kicks off next decade. That's the next haul form to follow the very successful Arleigh Burke class program. And that's going to allow us to land things like directed energy and larger missile launchers to get after threats that we know we're going to have to be able to address going forward.
So you're creating requirements, sort of demand signal to some extent, but on the supply side, how are you observing, how are you thinking about some of the restrictions that are usually put forward, in terms of the bottlenecks for industry, whether it's post-COVID supply chain things, they're still recovering from that, whether it be inflation, material cost, availability, et cetera, et cetera. How are you seeing that, and what is the Navy doing to help alleviate that for you?
Sure. So some of you may have seen the recently released 45-day shipbuilding review. That review talks about some of the challenges where I say Navy and industry in the acquisition community are having in shipbuilding. The dialogue is very good with all of our industry partners. I just returned from a trip down to Huntington Ingalls and Pascagoula, Bollinger Shipyard, and Oslo Shipyard. So we have a very close working relationship with our industry partners. So we understand when there are green labor issues, where the workforce that they have isn't as experienced as we'd like them to be. We understand regional issues like housing may be a challenge, childcare, those fundamental things that you need. And also the propensity to want to work in a shipyard, go into the trades and be a welder, be a pipe fitter, work in that environment when there are competing wages outside that don't involve working in a shipyard. So I think that's well understood from the Navy, from industry, from Congress, and we're collectively working to address each of those issues and incentivize, America's youth to say, hey, I'd be willing to serve in the trades and, build or repair ships. That's a career, winning program that I could get into. So I think that dialogue is very positive. Still have a lot of work to do to correct all those issues and get moving in the right direction.
You said a couple minutes ago, if we can get to multi-year procurement on these things, that is goodness. So the question then is, some in the past PBs have been requested for certain munitions and others have not been. What is your thinking, what is your thought process? What is the strategy for ascertaining, yes, it makes sense to go multi-year on this, no, it doesn't?
Sure. So first, it's got to start with a threat. I mean, does that capability address a threat that we need to address? Is the maturity of the design and the round where it needs to be, to where we're comfortable saying, yeah, let's enter a multi-year agreement, and then does it compete? Does it compete in the budget environment we're in? And each program is unique in its own way. Standard missile program, SM2, SM6, very mature, currently demonstrating they've got a lot of capability. So that's the approach and that's the mindset that we go through. We do that obviously in close coordination with all of our acquisition teammates. I set the requirements, but the acquisition side and is it executable is another question. But I think we work extremely well together to make those calls on when is the right time to shift to a multi-year for a program.
Fair enough. And in terms of, you alluded to the supplemental already, but how is that going to alleviate, to the extent it's known, how is that going to alleviate some of these capacity things, do you think?
Yeah, so I think there's potential there for assistance in what we're doing on counter UAS, on countering the unmanned aerial systems. Keep in mind, September of last year, we didn't know we were going to be in a fight in the Red Sea and expending the amount of munitions that we've expended over the last 7-8 months. So, any assistance we can get there is goodness. But it also drives home the point and emphasizes the need to increase munitions across the board. So I think that's positive.
All right, well, shifting to kind of shipbuilding more broadly, which has also got some multi-year efforts. Have to go there. The CNO went over to, I think it was South Korea and Japan recently and came back and was pretty impressed with the efficiency, the on time, on budget that some of our partners are doing there. It's hard. There's a lot of factors that make shipbuilding hard, and yet at the same time, you highlighted it. The number of ships that, China's cranking out is getting kind of scary. How can we get after that? There was just this 45-day shipbuilding study that came out that's caused a lot of consternation. How do we get better at that?
Yeah, I mean, first it's the dialogue I mentioned with industry, making sure that we all have a shared sight picture on what the problem is. And some of the recurring problems are the green workforce. It's I'll call it the infrastructure at our building yards that support people wanting to flow in there, whether it's housing, whether it's daycare, whether it's quality of life on wanting to go into the trades. So that dialogue is positive. Congress has been very supportive when we identify those issues and help flow funds to those industry partners to help them make capital investments to address those issues. We're seeing capital improvements across our industry partners, whether it's automating the supply process on how to flow parts, from outside the yard to the point of need in the yard, the ability to get ships, from the land into the water and not have them sliding down ways. So we're seeing that progress, but we just need to move quicker, and we need more of it in every area.
All right. In terms of not really the number of the fleet, but also the makeup. This is kind of back to the changing strategic environment. How would you characterize, again, from where you sit, the relative makeup of the fleet? Cruisers versus frigates versus destroyers versus carriers. What aspects, what qualities of the threat that you're seeing are going to be shaping that disposition?
Sure. So I'll speak to the surface force. So we're made up by large surface combatants. So those are destroyers, cruisers, DDG-1000. Small surface combatants, which are the frigate and the littoral combat ship, and then unmanned. And right now we have 74 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. We want to grow that number a little bit. On small surface combatants, that's the number we want to grow the most. So the frigates, we really want to make sure we start getting in the business of building frigates and grow that number because we need more capable small surface combatants. And then the unmanned space, my contribution to the unmanned are things like large unmanned surface vessel. That's an adjunct magazine that we can launch missiles from. And it increases that capacity for the fleet when we talked about the value of having these missiles out there. So large unmanned surface vessel is a way to increase that capacity. Medium unmanned surface vessel is another unmanned craft that we can put payloads on. It could be something to counter C5 ISR&T capability. There's many things you could put on that truck. And then there's small unmanned surface vessels that provide another capability. So that's the lens I view the force development through, centered around carrier strike groups, centered around 31 amphibs, and then of course our submarine fleet and what we're doing in production there.
But since you brought up the USVs, given that we have not had a lot of those in the past, but we're clearly shifting in that direction, how we think about the manned-unmanned mix? And then likewise, how do you think about the O&M for those floating magazines, unattended magazines?
Sure, so I see a future where in the next several decades, you could see a 60% manned, 40% unmanned surface force when you talk about these capabilities that I just went through on large, medium, and small unmanned surface vessels. We are doing a lot of work with our partners at Office of Naval Research, Naval Research Lab, industry, to get to where these platforms can operate for extended period of time. And think weeks where we don't want to put a sailor on board, that this thing's just out there operating, doing whatever its mission is assigned. So from an OMAN cost, from operation and maintenance, we want to get to where we minimize the amount of time that we're putting a sailor on these platforms. That's the future. We're not there yet, but we're making the investments to get there and have that be the to-be state of unmanned, manned integration.
And I've got to ask about not just the destroyers, but the Aegis cruisers, the Tychos, that are being decommissioned. You're in that process. There's a lot of VLS tubes. They're going to go away with the loss of those, and Congress has been kind of resistant on that. What's going on there?
Yes, I have that conversation with my congressional teammates.
Regularly, I'm sure.
Regularly, yes. So yes, the cruisers, average age right now, I think we're at about 34 years out of a 35-year expected service life. I've served on cruisers. They're near and dear to my heart, but they are at the end of their service life. And we need to transition from those hulls. Yep, they have a lot of VLS cells, and one way we're mitigating the loss of those VLS cells is through the large unmanned surface vessel and that adjunct magazine. Frigate will also help alleviate that as the frigate comes online. And the other piece that we are working on is the most efficient and effective way to employ weapons. We talked a little bit about this in Red Sea, but it applies to every theater. So we have an initiative called Terminal Defense, where we work with our partners up at Johns Hopkins and make sure we go through all the modeling and the process to have the most effective and efficient use, to include soft kill alternatives, right? I've grown up where we always like putting a missile on a missile. We like hard kill at max range. That's very comfortable to see stuff blow up like you saw in the smoke and fire video. But me and those that follow me need to get comfortable with the soft kill process, non-kinetic effects that are effective and allow us to keep another missile in the magazine.
So moving to kind of some other components on the ships, starting perhaps with the ICS, the Integrated Combat System effort. How much the Aegis combat system, again, Wayne Meyer's baby, as you transition from the ACS to the ICS, how we're going to make sure that the best of the Aegis is not lost? Is in some ways that vision being applied to the whole Navy, eating the Navy eating Aegis, or something else entirely?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I can't express how important integrated combat systems is. I think it's one of the biggest transitions in the Navy since we transitioned from sail to steam or started landing aircraft on ships. I think it's that significant. 2 points. There's a business case for ICS, meaning that it goes back to all those baselines I talked about. If we can get out of that business and get to one, we become much more efficient and it's much more cost effective. When we want to do an upgrade to a future carrier strike group or an amphibious ready group that is ICS capable, we can do that upgrade not quite like you do on your phone when you say you have to update your iOS, but that's the 2B state we want to get to, where you have information as a service. That's the business case. The warfighting case is you're going to have a capability where the operators can pair any weapon to any sensor to any shooter and conduct those engagements. It's that critically important. To the point, I mean, it's a great topic. We ask your exact question to ourselves about the father of Aegis and Wayne E.
What would
Meyer.
he say?
Yeah, I mean, what would Admiral Meyer say? I think all the goodness of Aegis that's been around for over the last 40 years will continue. Because you're taking the code of Aegis and you're taking the code of ship self-defense and you're merging that into one code. We're not going to throw out all the best practices we've developed with Aegis over 4 decades. That's in our DNA. And again, it's playing out extremely well right now on what your return on investment is for Aegis. But so I think that'll stay a core element of how we do business. Just the efficiency and the effectiveness of how we do combat systems upgrade is going to greatly improve. And then the end state is you've got a much better system for the warfighter that'll allow them to be effective against those high-end threats.
So let's talk radars. A lot of Spy 1s out there. Yes, the Spy 6 is coming online with the Flight 3s. That's great. Jack Lucas is in the water. But the Spy 1 production line is going away. How do you think about that in terms of risk, in terms of spares, in terms of maintenance and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so we're going to develop, we've developed a rotatable pool of Spy 1s. So you're going to see Spy 1s in the fleet through, I think we calculated 2067 at least, given the service life. So that radar system is going to be around for a while. So we've developed a long-term supply and resourcing rotatable pool to where if a radar fails or a radar gets damaged in a shipyard where something swings into it, we've got a pool that we can pull from and be able to replace those, to include the components so we get in front of any obsolescence issues of a system that has been around for 4 decades and is going to be around for 3 more decades. So I think we've postured ourselves well. That's an investment we got to maintain, continue to invest in, so we have that capability when we need it.
So, but on the Aegis sparing, I mean, are there Spy 1 battle spares, or is it just components?
I would say yes, and sparing. Again, this is a little bit like the story I talked about on munitions. We've taken risk in the past. We didn't value maximum sustaining rate. Same is true of sparing. We've acknowledged the need to improve on spares. We've made significant investments, as you've seen in PB24 and PB25, and that's something we're going to remain committed to make sure that spares across the fleet are where they need to be. Because the signpost for you have an issue in sparing is cannibalizations. Are we taking parts off another ship to make one ship whole? And those numbers were not going in the right direction. So we've made the necessary adjustments, and we're making the investments in spares.
I'm thinking of the components on the Tychos, for instance.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to missiles. I mentioned the Secretary of the Navy is saying, hey, we're going to have to go buy some more SM3 1Bs. Unfortunately, the Missile Defense Agency zeroed out that line in PB25. That strikes me as unfortunate. They were used to good effect for the historical first last month. What are you thinking about that? This is a round that, again, is in somebody else's budget. But do you believe that the Navy is going to advocate a demand signal for the SM3, which historically has been, again, less of a priority, I would say?
Yeah, so we have the Missile Defense Executive Board is the process we use within all of DoD to address integrated air missile defense capability needs. And that process, I think, is effective. The dialogue between our OSD partners and Missile Defense Agency is very positive. So I think that's goodness. I think we have the inventory we need right now with where we're going on the SM3 inventory.
Even with retiring the line?
I believe we do.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe we do. And again, it's a constant dialogue with our MDA teammates and our OSD teammates to make sure we have that correct inventory. But the necessary conversation is going
Okay.
to get after that.
Well, a Navy missile, on the other hand, the SM6, that's the Swiss Army knife, multi-mission, and it's going to a full 21-inch round with the 1B. How do you see the numbers that are being pumped out on that? It looks like the Navy just can't get enough of them. And again, they've been used to good effect here in recent weeks. So what's the future of the 1B, and do you see the industrial base able to supply enough of them?
Yeah, so we talked about shipbuilding industrial base. Some of those issues apply to the munitions industrial base. And here again, we've had great dialogue with our industry partners, OSD and the Hill, and I think we all have a good sight picture on what we need to do. We've gotten great support from all of those stakeholders. Again, Congress has been very supportive of supporting industry where they need assistance. And I do believe, from my perspective, we want to go faster in everything, right? We want it yesterday, but we understand the timeline it takes once we've properly resourced industry and what it takes to get to a maximum sustaining rate. For the SM6, we are going to get there, and I believe we've got the right funding in place and the right ramp as we go forward. But it's something we're going to pay close attention to, given the value of that weapon.
You brought up the SMs a number of times today, but there's still this concept being explored, the Navy modular missile. When is that coming? Is it coming? And how can that be fit together in the best way with our current SM family? Yeah,
so Navy modular missile is still a concept, not a program or record. It's something we as a requirements shop are thinking about, and we're discussing it with our teammates over at the Program Executive Office, Integrated Warfare Systems, as well as industry partners. So the theory is that you have a common front end that is very capable, and then you vary the back end, the rocket on that weapon, to the range you need. So it could be a small rocket for close in, it could be a medium-sized rocket for medium range, and then you get a larger rocket for long range. And we believe there'd be a lot of efficiency, cost effectiveness in that approach as we go forward. And there could also be some benefit of dual packing, quad packing, whatever the munition is, which takes those critical VLS cells we talked about and gives you more capability, more inventory in those VLS cells.
Last two Surface Navy shows I've been at, there's been discussion about maritime MSE for just what you're alluding to there, taking the Army's round, the PAC-3 MSE, and putting it perhaps in quantity into VLS. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so we are considering the PAC-3. We've recently, you probably saw in the press a few weeks ago, where we had a successful land-based test out west. And the next step is we're going to do an at-sea-based test later on. And the beauty of that round is it's been very effective over the years, and they're producing it at significant numbers.
And there's a lot more coming off the line of MSEs than there is SM6s.
So yes, we're taking a look at that. There's still much analysis to do. Again, we're working with APL to make sure that that is the best fit on that valuable VLS space, but it is something we're looking into.
Look, if the Army can buy Tomahawks, maybe it goes both ways. We'll see. You've also got torpedoes in your portfolio.
Yes.
What trend lines? What's changing there, especially in terms of the return to the bigs? Yeah.
So from an ASW perspective, first it starts from a theater ASW perspective. The P-8, great addition to the fleet. On how that aircraft performs. Embarked on our ships, we have the MH-60 Romeo, which has a great ASW capability, and then the suite that resides in our destroyers the SQQ-89 Alpha Victor 15 with a multifunction towed array. Very good piece of kit. On the frigate, we're going to put variable depth sonar on that platform, and that has been very effectively used with our allies and partners. And we continue to develop and look for improvements in all things anti-submarine warfare, whether it's what we use for our towed systems or what weapons we're putting on our P-8 or the helicopters.
You've alluded a couple times to cheaper solutions and things like that. What's the Navy learning? What's N96 learning from the Helios on the USS Preble? Some other, it's not just about lasers. Sometimes there's moisture and fog and not necessarily always conducive to that, but other directed energy systems broadly. How do you see the realistic prospect and limitations for that class?
Yeah, Tom, this is an area that, boy, the payoff is huge if we can figure out how to have a bottomless magazine weapon. So we're committed to directed energy. The technological challenge is there, and it's expensive. And we've been working on this as a force for probably about 2 decades. And we have exactly one laser weapon in the fleet right now, as you mentioned, on the good ship Preble. We want to be able to get to this capability. Some of the challenges, the capability to generate power, cooling, and support for the weapon. So we're building that SWAP-C, that space weight power cooling, into our frigates and the DDGX, so that when we do crack this nut, when we solve this technology problem of getting to directed energy weapons, we'll be able to land it on future platforms. Whether it's high-powered lasers or whether it's high-power microwave, we are making investments to demonstrate those technologies. So we remain committed to that. It's just proving challenging.
And again, the size weight power for the big threats is a lot more onerous than the smaller stuff. Certainly Army's investments there is being seen in spades. But the quantity of the lower end threats, the putting of, let's say, just basic counter UAS capabilities on the decks of ships in the near term, or smaller, lower kilowatt systems on the deck of the ship or wherever to defend itself, especially in the near term. What's the prospect for surging counter UAS capability there?
Yeah, so right now I'd say we're in development on some of those capabilities I talked about where we're looking for the Red Sea. We're going to work to demonstrate some of those things in the near term at sea, and then based on how they perform, and back to what we talked about of how the fleet views them, and if it's meeting fleet intent, then we'll start scaling if it meets expectation. From a directed energy standpoint, yep, there's opportunity there, but again, it's in small numbers, and we need to get to longer ranges, higher power, more successful demonstrations before we start scaling.
Hypervelocity projectiles?
We're taking a look at that as a capability, for sure. As a potential counter UAS, that is one system we're considering.
Now there's an unsinkable destroyer in the Pacific, Guam, and the air and missile defense of Guam is getting a whole heck of a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Of course, the Navy doesn't like tethers and wants to defend the fleet and do all the other many multi-mission things that the Aegis ships do. But the Aegis weapon system will be presumably part of the defense of Guam. The Army, of course, is the lead there. But regardless of the Navy's role on island, and for the defense of DIRT, whatever the operational role there is, there's going to need to be lots of connectivity between Aegis afloat and the Aegis weapon system on Guam, for instance. And so operationally, in terms of requirements, can you speak to your discussions with whether it's MDA and the Army on how there can be the best connectivity and interoperability at minimum between those various systems?
Sure. So to your point, we don't like defending dirt from dirt as a Navy. We like defending dirt from the sea. So that's our approach. Given the fact that I talked about 70% of the ocean is covered with water, and we have a very capable integrated air and missile defense capability, yes, that's something that we are going to be called upon to do by the combatant commanders. We understand that. We do have a good dialogue with the defense of Guam, with MDA, with our Army partners, and there's been a steady battle rhythm over the last 9+ months on architectures and how we're going to manage that architecture, and also how we're going to operate the systems. MDA has the lead on the majority of that design, and that's progressing well, I believe. And yet Navy will have a small contribution to that to do our part.
All right, we'll figure out who operates it in the fullness of time. Moving to space, the Sea Enabled by Space effort. We've got a question here from our own Annalise Johnson, who's a researcher with the Aerospace Security Project here at CSIS, and she wants to know if you could speak to the Navy's cooperation with the Space Force broadly.
Yeah, so I think the stand-up of the Space Force and Space Com, the combatant command, is very positive. We have good interaction with both commands. Navy's contribution in space domain awareness is significant, and now the fact that we have a single service and a single combatant command to provide the coordination of that's been very positive. As far as domains go and the next conflict and the significance of domains, I think the space domain is one of the most significant domains going forward, given what they're going to provide in architecture for us to communicate and our ability to conduct a long-range fight. Extremely important mission set, and that relationship has been very positive.
Great. We've covered a lot of ground, we've covered a lot of surface area today. I wonder if you already mentioned this earlier, but if you could talk a little bit about recruitment and what you might say to somebody that, say, was in high school or college and thinking about a career in the Navy.
Sure, happy to. So, I mean, right now recruiting is an existential threat. I'd say not only to the Navy, but to many of the services. Just as numbers, 2 years ago, recruiting numbers, we were short about 7,400. This year, voting's still out, but we remain challenged getting to our numbers. So that's a problem. And what we're finding is the propensity to serve of our youth is going down. So as I was coming out of high school and didn't quite have the grades I needed to get to Penn State University, I looked to the Navy as a chance to save a little bit of money for college, see the world, and then go do something else. I just didn't figure out what something else was. That's why I'm still here. And it's been very positive. What I would offer to anyone looking at what their career choices are going to be, the Navy is a great place to start. The education opportunity is tremendous. You are going to have an experience. I mean, look at what those sailors in that video are doing right now. You talk about a focus group. The day after those engagements you saw on the USS Kearney, the commanding officer had 15 re-enlistment packages on his desk. Those typically come in 1 or 2 a month. So the ethos, the mission, the sense of mission is there for those that are serving. I just ask that you help carry that mission to our youth, on those that are thinking about what their career choice is going to be. They don't have to do 40 years like this old guy. They can do a couple years, but I think they'll find it very rewarding. And if not serving in the Navy, then serving in shipbuilding or ship repair. We need youth in both of those areas to get after some of the challenges we talked about, Tom.
Every time we've interacted, you've mentioned Penn State in some way or another. I'm beginning to think you're a proud Nittany Lion.
I am.
Well, look, I wonder if you could just close us out with a few words about your vision for surface warfare and for its importance to the Joint Force.
Yeah, so again, I want to thank CSIS and you, Tom, for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed having some time to spend together. First and foremost, your surface Navy is forward deployed around the globe, operating 24/7, 365. And there's no better example of that of what's going on in the Red Sea. I just ask for your advocacy on what the surface force is doing. We talked about the challenges. The challenges are shipbuilding. The challenges are munition inventory. The challenges are recruiting. as you engage with folks in the national security apparatus, if you can help advocate for those and apply, resources, time, and energy to solving those issues, I would greatly appreciate it. On behalf of CNO, I know she would appreciate any support that our Navy can get in those areas.
Well, thank you, sir. Thanks for coming over, and thank you for your leadership and service. And please join me in thanking Admiral Pyle.
Thank you.